really shifts the way we, at least here in America, but I'm sure worldwide, like we hear, just Philippians 4:13, Jeremiah 29:11. You take context out, culture out, and sometimes some of the words. So here's my question on the topic that we're talking today, is that one of the points of the sermon series was like, thank God for translators, right? Because we don't even have words that really properly explain the depth of what some of the Greek or the Hebrew words are actually, what they're trying to express.
Yeah.
And so English translators have to make choices, and every choice loses something. So I guess, what are some of the most significant emotional and theological losses that happen when Hebrew poetry gets translated to English?
Oof, that is a good question. So I guess we'll start at the kind of the obvious bit, which is that any sound patterns are lost. We can't replicate how it sounds in Hebrew.
Right.
So like if I read you the beginning of Lamentations, for example, right? You've got this kind of, in English, it's how lonely sits the city that was full of people. She's become like a widow. She was great among the nations. She was a princess, but she's become a slave.
Right.
And you get this kind of, it's sometimes described as a city lament, so you've got this sense of mourning. And in Hebrew, you just hear this sound, which is just beautiful, but also quite tragic.
Sure.
It's Eicha Yashava Badad Ha'ir Ravati, and it's just
Interesting.
you can hear that.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, I guess, that gets missed. The other thing that you find in the Psalms and in Proverbs and in Job is that they have quite a distinct pattern of accents and intonation. So the Masoretes, who wrote down these dots and dashes above the letters in about the 9th, 10th century, were preserving this kind of oral tradition of how they're spoken, and they're called te'amim. They're called taste marks, so that you can actually taste the words.
Oh, wow!
Because of how you hear them.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's the way, obviously, the way that poetry is spoken really impacts how you feel, how you relate to that. And in English, it just doesn't do the same thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that's the first way I think we miss out. Secondly, the translator is always a traitor, right? the phrase in Italian, translator traitor. How can you translate a metaphor in another language?
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
It's.
I do not envy those positions, because it's what you want to say, but you can't express it enough.
Yeah. I mean, with parallelism, you can kind of get close. We can have a go at saying the same thing in slightly different ways. But in terms of what makes up the artistry of the poetry, that's always really hard. And actually, a lot of Psalms translators have had a go at giving you some sort of equivalent. So the metrical psalter, for example, was an attempt at doing that, is giving us a bit of English poetry, as we recognize it.
Right.
So a lot of people have grown up with a particular version of Psalms that rhyme, and that's what they've learned and come to appreciate. That rhyme isn't in there in the Hebrew,
right?
But it's giving a similar kind of effect.
Gotcha.
For those of us sort of reading them in English. So yeah, that's a kind of an interesting thing.
You've written. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, you've written about the affective dimension of these texts as well, meaning that the way they were designed to make you feel something, not just think something. You briefly mentioned just a couple of things over here. How does that challenge the way most pastors and teachers approach the Old Testament today?
That's a really interesting point. So I think when we come across metaphors, it's worth thinking about their function. So in any metaphor, there's an informative function, in a sense. It's what's the content, what's it saying? But there's also a performative function. Is this metaphor designed to make you feel something? Is it designed to make you do something?